Hello children, I'm back with another video from NCERT Class 6 Honeysuckle book Chapter 3 Taro's Reward. In my this video I will be explaining the chapter paragraph wise. It's a Japanese retold story and is a story about a thoughtful and loving son. He exerts considerable effort to satisfy his parents' desires and unexpectedly obtains support. The story explores the lengths to which he goes to satisfy his parents' desires. The first paragraph says a young woodcutter named Taro lived with his mother and father on a lonely hillside. All day long he chopped wood in the forest. Here the word chopped means cut into pieces. Though he worked very hard, he earned very little money. This made him sad, for he was a thoughtful son and wanted to give his old parents everything they needed. Now, explanation for the first paragraph is it is seen in the first paragraph that a young woodcutter named Taro lived with his mother and father on a lonely hillside. Taro chopped wood all day in the forest, and through this he earned very little money. Therefore, this made him sad and upset. For being a caring and dutiful son, he wanted to give his parents everything that they needed, but he was trying hard to fulfill his parents' wishes. One evening, when Taro and his parents were sitting in a corner of their hut, a strong wind began to blow. It whistled through the cracks of the hut, and everyone felt very cold. Suddenly, Taro's father said, I wish I had a cup of sake. It would warm me and do my old heart good. Now, explaining this paragraph too, Taro and his parents were sitting at the corner of the hut one evening when a strong wind blew through the cracks of his hut, making the atmosphere in Taro's hut colder, as it was already cold in Japan, and a whistling sound, which everyone felt really cold, and all of a sudden, Taro's father wished for drinking sake, a costly Japanese drink to warm him. Here, the word cracks mean narrow gaps or openings. The phrase whistle through means pass through with a whistling sound. And the word sake here means it's a very popular Japanese drink. The paragraph 3 says, this made Taro sadder than ever, for the heartwarming drink called sake was very expensive. How do I earn more money? He asked himself. How do I get a little sake for my poor old father? He decided to work harder than before. Now, explaining this paragraph, the paragraph 3 talks about firstly how sad Taro felt more than ever before, for he was unable to feed the expensive drink sake to his old father. He then thought about how he could earn more money to make the high priced drink affordable or accessible to him for his good old hearted father. So he decided to work harder than before. In fourth paragraph, next morning, Taro jumped out of his bed earlier than usual and made his way to the forest. Here the phrase made his way means went to. He chopped and cut as the sun climbed, and soon he was so warm that he had to take off his jacket. His mouth was dry, and his face was wet with sweat. My poor old father, he thought, if only he was as warm as I. And with that, he began to chop even faster, thinking of the extra money he must earn to buy the sake to warm the old man's bones. Now, explaining this paragraph, the other morning, Taro jumped out of his bed and went to the forest. This time he woke earlier than usual. He began to chop and cut the wood that the sun rose, and he started to feel so warm that he took off his jacket. Taro's mouth was dry and his face was wet with sweat, thinking about his old father, and wished him to be as warm as he was then in the forest. Thinking of the financial problem to solve in order to feed his old father with sake to warm his old bones, He even increased the speed of his hand and chopped the wood faster. The next paragraph says, then suddenly Taro stopped chopping. What was that sound he heard? Could it possibly be rushing water? Taro could not remember ever seeing or hearing a rushing stream in that part of the forest. He was thirsty. The axe dropped out of his hands and he ran in the direction of the sound. Now, explaining this paragraph, suddenly he paused from chopping wood in the forest and heard a sound coming from a direction. He didn't remember hearing or seeing a rushing stream in that part of the forest, but he was thirsty. He dropped his axe and he followed the sound of the rushing stream. The next paragraph says Taro saw a beautiful little waterfall hidden behind a rock. Kneeling at a place where the water flowed quietly, he cupped a little in his hands and put it to his lips. Was it water or was it sake? He tasted it again and again, and always it was the delicious sake instead of cold water. Explaining this paragraph, surprisingly, he saw a little waterfall concealed behind a rock. He crouched by the little waterfall where it flowed gently and cupped his hands to bring the water to his lips for a taste. Taro pondered the water repeatedly as he tasted it over and over. The waterfall from which the water flowed was delicious sake rather than cold water. The next paragraph says Taro quickly filled the pitcher. Here, the word pitcher means a pot usually made of mud. He had with him and hurried home. The old man was delighted with the sake. After only one swallow of the liquid, he stopped shivering and did a little dance in the middle of the floor. Now, explaining this paragraph, what he did was then Taro immediately filled his pitcher with sake and rushed home to give his old dad the sake. His dad was delighted to get the sake from Taro. After swallowing for once, he stopped shivering from cold and started to do a little dance in the middle of the floor out of happiness and felt the energy in his old bones after drinking sake. Paragraph 8 says that afternoon a neighbor stopped by for a visit. Taro's father politely offered her a cup of the sake. The lady drank it greedily and thanked the old man. Then Taro told her the story of the magic waterfall. Thanking them for the delicious drink, she left in a hurry. By nightfall, she had spread the story throughout the whole village. Here, the word greedily means to desire for more and more. Now, explaining paragraph 8, that afternoon a neighbor stopped by for a visit. Politely, Taro's father offered her a cup of sake. The lady drank it with greed and thanked Taro's father. Then Taro told her the story of the magical waterfall. The neighbor, in a hurry, thanking them for the delicious drink, left them, and by nightfall she had spread the story in the whole village. The next paragraph says that evening there was a long procession of visitors to the woodcutter's house. Here, the word procession means a line or queue of visitors in the story. Each man heard the story of the waterfall and took a sip of the sake. In less than an hour, the pitcher was empty. Now, explaining this paragraph 9, that very evening, there were many people in a line to Taro's house. Everyone in the village heard about the story of the waterfall and took a sip of sake in less than an hour. The jug at the woodcutter's house went empty. The next paragraph says, next morning, Taro started for work even earlier than the morning before. He carried with him the largest pitcher he owned, for he intended first of all to go to the waterfall. Here, the word intended means planned. When he reached it, he found to his great surprise all his neighbors there. They were carrying pitchers, jars, buckets, anything they could find to hold the magic sake. Then one villager knelt and held his mouth under the waterfall to drink. He drank again and again, and then shouted angrily, "Water! Nothing but water!" Others also tried, but there was no sake, only cold water. Like now explaining this paragraph, the next morning, Taro went to work earlier than the morning before and carried a large jug and had planned to go to the waterfall first. But when he reached there, he found himself surprised as all of his neighbors were standing there at the waterfall. All of them were carrying pitchers, jars, and buckets. To check the water falling from the waterfall, one villager knelt and held his mouth under the waterfall to drink and taste it. He tasted it over and over again and then screamed out of anger loudly, and others also tried that it's nothing but only cold water. The next paragraph says, "We have been tricked," shouted the villagers. "Where is Taro? Let us drown him in this waterfall." But Taro had been wise enough to slip behind a rock when he saw how things were going. He was nowhere to be found. Here the word trick means deceived. I'm underlining this word here, tricked. It means deceived. Now, explaining this paragraph 11, the villagers exclaimed that they had been tricked by Taro and had wanted to drown him in the waterfall. However, Taro was wise enough to slip behind a rock when he was watching how things were going near the waterfall. He was nowhere to be found. Muttering their anger and disappointment, the villagers left the place one by one. Here, the word muttering means speaking unclearly. Taro came out from his hiding place. Was it true? He wondered. Was the sake a dream? Once more, he caught a little liquid in his hand and put it to his lips. It was the same fine sake. To the thoughtful son, the magic waterfall gave the delicious sake. To everyone else, it gave only cold water. Explaining this paragraph, his neighbors muttered their anger and disappointment. The villagers left one by one, and Taro, when all the villagers left the place, came out from his hiding place. He was wondering if that sake drink was a dream. Once more he caught liquid in his hands and put the water to his lips to taste. It was the same fine sake and not cold water. The magical waterfall gave sake to Taro and not cold water. The final paragraph says, the story of Taro and his magic waterfall reached the Emperor of Japan. He sent for the young woodcutter and rewarded him with 20 pieces of gold for having been so kind and good. Then he named the most beautiful fountain in the city after Taro. This, said the emperor, was to encourage all children to honor and obey their parents. Now, explaining this paragraph, this story reached the Emperor of Japan about Taro and his magic waterfall. He rewarded him with 20 pieces of gold for being so kind and good. Then the Emperor of Japan named the most beautiful fountain, that waterfall, with Taro's name in the city. This was to encourage all children to honor and obey their parents. Thank you all for listening to my explanatory video on this chapter. I'm sure that all of you have understood my explanation. Meet you all in my next video. Goodbye.